It's interesting how some things get started. For instance, the expression rule of thumb. Most people, when they look it up, are surprised to find a reference to an Old English common law, which allegedly stated that a man could only beat his wife with a rod no thicker than his thumb. It's still, to this day, regularly referred to in that way, and the persistent belief has even made it into a pejorative of the feminist movement. But that history is actually incorrect. Although it's been used that way in legal proceedings centuries ago, stating it as the basis for its argument, it was not ever an English common law, and thus the legal standing they used back then had no legs at all. It's funny how it is when people create a false history that allows subjugation and abuse to continue unchecked, referencing supposed long-practiced doctrinal interpretation to support their case. Where else have we seen that occur? In any case, in plain sight, one can simply just look at the definition in the Oxford English Dictionary. The phrase rule of thumb means a method or procedure derived entirely from practice or experience without any basis in scientific knowledge, a roughly practical method. This was the meaning in use as of 1692, and it's still what we mean by the use of that phrase over 300 years later. It never meant anything in reference to domestic abuse. But it does actually have an additional meaning as a method by which brewers once tested the temperature of a batch of beer. They dipped their thumb in it. What would you consider to be an important rule of thumb of your own? My most important rule of thumb is to do unto others as I would have done unto me. And it matches the criteria of the true definition. It's not a scientifically observable rule. It's a roughly practical method of how to live in the world. It's a procedure derived entirely from practice and experience. It's been my experience from the practice of this rule of thumb that my life is better when I practice what I preach. The Gnostics believed that the light of Source is not so much outside of us as within us, that we carry a divine spark. More importantly, that they were authorized to conclude about the ultimate reality for themselves, without power structures or intermediaries, without dogma. That's why they were considered heretical, because they dared to conclude they were their own authority. We have a light within. We need not declare what it means or from where it came. Those things don't matter. What matters most is using it. May this light remind you of your own. What are your sources? It's a worthwhile question to have to answer. Who or what informs your reality? What books have influenced you? Movies, television, people, sports figures, politicians, money. Everyone puts their faith in something based on their sources of inspiration. If you want your life to be different, consider your sources. In 1952, President-elect Dwight Eisenhower, speaking to the Freedoms Foundation in New York, said, quote, "Our sense of government has no sense unless it is founded in a deeply religious faith, and I don't care what it is. With us, of course, it is the Judeo-Christian concept, but it must be a religion that all men are created equal." End quote. He wasn't saying that one organized religion should rule the country. Eisenhower believed that we must practically make a religion out of the act of seeking equality and fairness. That our prime directive must be to make better this world and all who inhabit it with the same fervor of the religious. He didn't care what religion you believed in, what God you prayed to, but that one another's equality should be our faith and doctrine as a people. It's one of the earliest mentions of the concept of the Judeo-Christian ethic in our country, and most clarifying. The Judeo-Christian ethic is not about theology or even religion, really. Although religion was a principal carrier of the message, the ethical stance to do unto others as you would have them do unto you is independent even of a belief in God. It has purely to do with how we tread upon this earth and how we hold one another. But doing unto others as we would have them do unto us is a virtual fantasy goal nearly impossible to universally enact. We say it so often, we actually think we live up to it. What a crock. The fraction of our time we spend actually treating people well would probably surprise us, especially if you begin to configure our carbon footprints, the leaders we vote for, the way we treat our domesticated animals, the plastic bottles we throw away, the cigarettes we still smoke. We may donate to charity, we may volunteer, we may religiously smile at every person who walks down the street. But most of us average out to not being very friendly to the world at all. Yet, every little bit still matters. Each of those smiles sends a ripple into the universe like a bell being rung. But we ring many bells. Some good, some not so much. Even the Liberty Bell has a crack in it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and all the various teachings which surround and support it are much like the U.S. Constitution. It's a gleaming ideal toward which we must always strive, written well in advance of our ability to fully enact it. The debate has always been on how to strive for it. And to be fair, the term Judeo-Christian ethic was originated in politics as far as this country is concerned, but even from that, it described a shared vision of that one day we would be at peace with one another. It became synonymous with interfaith understanding and action. The Judeo-Christian ethic, long before it was put into words for political use, arrives at us first through Judaism, then philosophically processed and specified by the teachings of Jesus. He provided a synthesis of understanding regarding the old laws, which ones were still valid, which ones needed updating. His most specific update was regarding the old Hammurabi code of eye for an eye, which by Jesus' time still haunted Judaism, even though the practice was becoming a bit less literal by then. The Judeo-Christian ethic was summed up by Jesus in the following passage from the book of Matthew. It's actually quite a challenging passage, as it asks us to be things that seem impossible, even dangerous. The New American Standard Bible translates the original Greek as follows. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than anyone else? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So it gives the appearance he's saying we need to learn to take abuse in order to be perfect. But that's not what's really going on here. I think he's being very literal in a non-literal way. I think he's encouraging us to respond differently than we traditionally do. I think he's saying to be radical in our way of creating a loving response to hateful action. We are being taught here how to truly disarm an opponent. I think he's teaching us that if we do things differently, we may just get a different end result over time. You know what they say about the definition of crazy, after all? It's doing the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result. The teaching here is to do things differently. The infamous Christian quotable from the above passage is turn the other cheek. It's not about continuing our abuse. It's about non-resistance. It's about turning away. It's about not placing our energies on that which we do not want any longer. The plant you water is the plant that grows. The wolf you feed with your attention and resistance is the one who survives. The adversary you battle against is the same one developing bigger weapons against you. The one you stop fighting against is the one who falls over from the weight of their useless armor and weaponry. The terrorist organization who fails is not the one we war against. It's the ones whose funding we locate and withdraw. The bigots, the racists, the politically enraged. We demand their failure and their silence. But that hasn't worked. The right side of history has demoralized those who are afraid of change. We should be in the business of softening hearts, not building weapons. The hearts who soften are the ones we have listened to. Even when what they say is hard to hear, listen between the lines of their anger and fear. Listen honestly. Silencing hate will not end it. We must be brave enough to listen to it. Besides, hate doesn't really exist. Only fear. Fear can be comforted, but only if we turn from resisting it. What we resist persists. What we love grows. To stop a sailboat, you can't do it with more hot air. One must stop the wind altogether. Mother Teresa knew all about this. She was quoted as saying, quote, I once was asked why I don't participate in anti-war demonstrations. I said that I will never do that. But as soon as you have a pro-peace rally, I'll be there. End quote. That is what the Judeo-Christian ethic asks of us. Anger and frustration fuel resistance. And while it's perfectly logical that anger and frustration are the responses to stress, they're just more of the same old way of coping with things. They don't change outcomes. We're taught forgiveness because forgiveness means letting go, not necessarily forgetting, but ending the cycle of resentment about a reality over which we never have, nor ever will have any real control. When someone's tailgating you, it's the difference between driving slower and pulling over to let them pass. What if you knew the reason they were tailgating you? Would that make a difference in how you feel about their actions? I personally would feel much better about pulling over if I thought the reason they were in such a rush was because they really needed to go to the bathroom. Pulling over is easy because you're able to let go of your frustration. We've all been there. Forgiveness leads us to empathy and compassion. We have compassion for someone who's about to wet themselves. We're able to put ourselves in their place and recognize ourselves in their story, which leads us toward compassion. The doors of compassion are opened by learning to be forgiving. Compassion is active. It leads us to be sympathetic of another's situation and use our own privilege, whatever it may be, to the assistance of another. But there are pitfalls to compassion if not practiced carefully and mindfully. It's easy to mistake the difference between helping someone and serving someone. Helping is giving them a fish. Serving is teaching them how to do it for themselves. Empowerment. Empowerment is the hardest of all because it means that we not only have to make our decisions about how to engage with others on this level, we also have to engage with ourselves. We have to be constantly mindful of what will best serve us, not merely help us. Quitting a bad habit is empowering, but not easy. It's easier to just keep on helping ourselves. And when someone comes to us asking for our help, we need to think about what it is they really need. Sometimes it's not help. I know a story of a young man addicted to drugs who, after he'd had enough, called his stepmother for money to come home to Massachusetts from California. She said, "You were smart enough to get yourself into this situation. You're smart enough to get yourself out." And she then hung up. Who knows what might have happened if she had just helped him out and sent him the money for the ticket. The young man began to get clean after that. He credits the moment when she hung up on him for doing it. Tough love is painful, but often empowering. And finally, if one is able to be non-resistant, leading them to being forgiving, which opens up our ability to be compassionate, we find the only way to truly serve is to empower. From there, we're able to be truly hospitable. We are free to be welcoming in the face of difficult realities. Hospitality is a natural extension of the first teaching, non-resistance. Our doors are open because we understand the human heart, because we've been non-resistant to it, because we've let it in. We understand weakness and love them in spite of themselves. Because to love something challenging is not the same thing as authorizing its behavior. It's taking it and allowing it to exist without resistance, flooding it with love and compassion and empowerment, with the expectation that this action will have the best chance of transforming it into the best of all possible forms. These are the teachings of the Judeo-Christian ethic. These are what informs the original basis of both Unitarianism as well as Universalism. They are what gives room for all the others to exist within the same spiritual framework, and by whose grace we know that we are all worthy. We all deserve justice and equality, to be accepted, not merely tolerated, to be free to act in accordance with our own conscience, to engage with the world around us, to recognize our inherent unity, to know that all life is not only special, but sacred. Be at ease now, and breathe. As you draw air in and out, feel the rush of oxygen and nitrogen as it flows in and out of you. As you exhale, picture yourself sliding and sinking down into your seat. Feel the weight of your shoulders and allow them to relax. Notice the tension in your legs and allow them to release, and breathe. Picture standing with a brick wall in front of you. You cannot see the top of it. You cannot see around it. For all you know, it's as thick as it is high. You could rightly decide that this wall is impenetrable. But one thing you do know for certain. You know this wall is standing in your way. Would you push against it? Would you go and get a battering ram? A bulldozer? Would you design a weapon to explode it? These won't work. Somehow you know this, but you are not defeated. You are suddenly inspired to do something radical. You slowly turn away from the wall and look at the open space behind you. You breathe in the openness. As you exhale, you literally feel the wall crack behind you. A sprinkling of dust hisses slightly as it lands on the ground. You start to imagine that the openness you see in front of you is your new reality. This is what life is really about, you think to yourself. The wall starts to crumble from the other side. Through the wall, you can hear the sound of bricks falling, landing with soft, resonant thuds you can feel in your feet. Empowered now, you imagine that everyone's reality is as open as this. Behind you, the bricks start falling faster now. Slabs of brick land with a distinct, heavy thud. You're aware of what's happening, but now you really lean into this new way of thinking. Breathe in the openness. You visualize how people will react to experiencing openness, how much joy they will feel once they have been released, how much more joy they will experience now for once having been walled in. Freedom is so much sweeter. You have become so absorbed in this thought you have forgotten about the wall entirely, until you turn around and find it's gone. Only a pile of bricks which you may now use to make something beautiful. You feel nothing but peace, and you walk forward. Peaceful, empowered, compassionate. And breathe. All is well.